one of the most important things for me during the cancer journey that I feel is crucial for anyone moving through a health journey like that is to make your choices from deep within you, to really, really trust those gut feelings that you have.
Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing personal stories of transformation from people whose lives have been touched by cancer. My name is Cheryl Buck, and I will be guiding today's conversation. Our guest this week is Annah Taylor Phinny, a spiritual healer, author, and priestess of Avalon. Her spiritual practice involves honoring Mother Earth and living in accordance with her seasons and cycles. Annah Taylor Phinny, welcome to Cancer Talks.
Thank you.
I went to your Instagram this morning, which I want people to know is avalon.calling. And I saw that you had been on a year-long hiatus from social media, which you described as having magical surprises and divine alignment beyond your wildest dreams. I definitely want to get to that sometime in our conversation. But so you have been on hiatus, and it looks like you just came back. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And I just want to say how honored I am to be here with you in this space that you've created and to share my story.
Well, I was about to say how honored I am that you would be here and share your story with me. You know, it was about a year ago. So, there's some divine timing in our whole relationship, which I just love, that before you went on hiatus, we came across your Instagram post, which I'd love for you to read in a minute. And it epitomized the essence of Cancer Talks, our reason to be. And it was so wonderful for us to have found someone speaking the same language that we were speaking. And so then we set out to find you and to connect with you. And here we are a year later. You're bringing your story and our common message, the message that we both share about cancer. Anyway, it's just really, for me personally, it's very moving, and it's a full circle experience. So I welcome you with open arms and big heart and lots of love, which I have felt since I didn't know you a year ago.
I feel your heart so much. Thank you, Cheryl.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Now, there was what I call the famous quote, which was the message that you put on your Instagram a year ago. And I actually see that it's on there now when I looked today. I've heard myself read it and say it out loud many, 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 many times over the last year.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So I would love to hear it in your voice, in the way that you say it. So if you would be ever so kind as to read it, that would be wonderful.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. And I just want to really acknowledge and celebrate your mission with Cancer Talks, because I truly know in my being from personal experience that cancer is a call for deep healing and transformation. And any health challenge really is just a deep call from within. The body is giving us a message to return to balance and to find harmony within. And so when it's contextualized in that way, there's such deep opportunity for knowing oneself more deeply and healing and transforming and really expanding beyond previous limitations and coming into a life that we never even knew was possible for us.
Yes.
So
beautiful, beautiful.
Okay, so as you know, I've written a book about my journey.
Yes.
Called Lady of the Lake Rise: Breast Cancer as a Path to Wholeness Through the Eyes of a Priestess of Avalon. And in my book, I parallel my journey with the story of the goddess Inanna and her descent into the underworld. So it's really my personal mythological journey of being stripped of all the things that no longer served me and then reclaiming the truth of my being as I ascended. And it's not in chronological order. It's spiraling and ebbing and flowing like the heroine's journey. So it's told in a feminine, exemplified through the feminine experience. So here's the introduction. Well, the first paragraph. On December 1st, 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 36. I was sitting on the couch in my mom's living room, my breast bruised and bandaged from the invasive biopsy procedures, riddled with anxiety, awaiting the phone call from the doctor. When the news came, I fell to the floor and screamed. Relentless primal wails flooded through my body from the darkest caverns of the earth, reverberating and echoing through the house like thunder. It was beyond my realm of comprehension at the time that I was crossing a threshold into the most exquisite transformation of my life. I stand before you now, dear reader, to share that I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Oh, that's so powerful. And oh, it brings tears to my eyes. It's so beautiful, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is. Well, actually, I have one question. Was your mother home when you got the call?
She was home. My sister was there. My former husband was there.
Oh my goodness.
So the way that it unfolded was that she had actually gotten, she had already gotten a call that had been a red flag to her.
Uh huh.
And I was in Los Angeles specifically for the tests because I wasn't living in Los Angeles at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at her house, and my former husband was with my sister, and she called them to come over. So they all came over just as the doctor called.
Oh my gosh.
She had a
Yes.
feeling that there was news coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so they all arrived kind of with very sullen looks on their faces. And then the phone rang.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Yeah.
yes, they were all there.
Uh huh.
And it was just, something that was a thread throughout the healing experience through cancer was connecting to this deep primal place in me
Mm-hmm.
that was beyond language, that just
Yes.
spoke in these, wails and screams and perhaps movements, but it was very primal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that was incredibly cathartic and necessary to allow those noises and movements and sounds and reverberations and whatever it was in the moment to
Mm-hmm.
come forward.
Yes.
And I know that that was essential to the journey, and so that was sort of my initiation that
Uh
day
huh. Yeah. Right. The
into
beginning of
that.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I have read the book. You were kind enough to share the manuscript with me. So it's a soon to be published book, which what you're just describing really happened all throughout this journey. And it seemed very appropriate. And I forget how you put it, but like a necessary part of your healing journey and really like letting it all out. It's quite
Absolutely.
extraordinary. And I think I'm not going to say how many people or most people, but a lot of people would hold it in. And I say, kudos to you for having the courage and the understanding to just let it out.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I do feel called to share that the book is still awaiting the perfect publisher.
Okay.
So just sending a call out to the perfect publisher.
Okay.
Yes, so absolutely. I really understood through one of my spiritual teachers, who I share quite a bit about in the book, that cancer is a dis-ease of suppression.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes from some suppressed trauma or emotion stored in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we can do the opposite, the more that will open up that space to allow it to unravel so that we can heal at the root.
Yes. You use the phrase further on in the book about unwinding. That
Mm-hmm.
was really a great image. Can you talk about that? Just why you were unwinding this energy, and you thought you were going clockwise, like turning clockwise, and then you
Oh,
realized,
of course, of
oh,
course.
oh, I'm going counterclockwise. I'm
Oh,
unwinding
yes.
something. Yeah.
Yes,
What was
yes.
that you were unwinding?
Okay, so I have, I'm a trained priestess, and
Mm-hmm.
so I have a very embodied practice in invoking the elements and calling in the goddesses and creating ritual space in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And traditionally, that's always clockwise or sunwise, as the Celts referred to it.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many traditions around entering a stone circle and walking sunwise, or walking around a well sunwise or clockwise. So it's like it's a way of being in sacred space that is on a cellular level in my body, because it's something that I've done for years and years. And
Mm-hmm.
especially during that time, was a daily practice, if not multiple times a day, calling to the goddesses and calling in the elements, and doing it in a particular way where I was facing the directions and turning in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
So at this particular time, which was right after I had finished chemotherapy, I had actually had gone through 6 rounds of chemo and had my mastectomy surgery, which I referred to as my transformation ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as soon as I could get on a plane, 6 weeks later, which, looking back, is, I'm still sort of amazed that I could do that, because I was just so incredibly raw.
Mm-hmm.
However,
Yeah.
I knew that I needed that land. My soul was just longing to connect with
Mm-hmm.
Avalon in a physical way, to be with the water, to be with the earth there. And I walked with a friend of mine named Carrie to a place called Bride's Mound, which is a lesser known sacred site in Glastonbury dedicated to the goddess Brigid. And it was a beautiful sunny day in July, and we were just laying on the grass, just enjoying the energy there, and decided to kind of do some spontaneous ritual. And I stood up to call to the goddesses. And after speaking for a few moments, I realized that I was going backwards. So I was going counterclockwise. I was going, in the opposite direction than is completely embedded in me, that I could probably do in my sleep.
Right.
And all of a sudden, because of that training, and because of training in healing work and energy work, where often when there's an energy that needs to be unwound, you work counterclockwise.
Mm-hmm.
So I just recognized, okay, I must be unwinding something. It was just this deep inner knowing. So
Mm.
I acknowledged it aloud, and then I just went with it.
Yeah.
And when I got to the direction of the northwest, which in the Priestess of Avalon tradition is associated with Caridwen, who's the dark goddess, and very appropriate, because here we are at the time of Samhain. She's the goddess associated with Samhain, which is the Celtic season that we're presently in. It's the
Mm-hmm.
origin of Halloween.
Oh,
and
interesting.
and so we got to the dark goddess, and she rules death and transformation, and the betwixt and between, the place between the worlds, and the realm of the unconscious, the shadow, the dark, the unknown. But she's also magic and power, and the power of transformation, and the underworlds. And of course, I had very much related to living in the underworld, which is a huge part of the book, my experience of my consciousness really existing in the underworld through the healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I am calling to the goddesses backwards, and arriving at Caridwen, and this just invocation to her and to the dark goddess, and all of these energies I'm describing just came forward. And as it was happening, this force of energy just pulled me down to the earth, and I fell to my knees. And while my body was sobbing, just sobbing and heaving, in my inner vision, I found myself in a cave, and I was there with Carrie Dwen, with this dark goddess who's a grandmother. Essentially, she's a crone. She's a wisdom keeper. She's a medicine woman, but she's fierce. She really shows us exactly what we need to see, and a lot of people find that frightening. So there can be fear around the dark goddess, but really it's that which is unseen, the realms of that which is unseen, which has been disowned by us in some capacity. But the journey of reclaiming that and facing it with love brings it into conscious awareness, and that's the path to healing. So the working with the dark goddess is the path to true healing and embodiment. So here I am facing her in this cave, and she said to me, she basically released me. She said, "You can go now. We're done. We're done here."
Wow.
And I felt this tremendous energy being released from me. And she gave me a very loving grandmotherly hug. And it was such a real experience.
Wow.
And I felt like the penetrating gaze of her eyes, really looking into my soul. And I turned and started walking out towards a light that I saw. And, I was it was almost like I was crawling through the dirt to get out of this passage, back out into the world. And when I exited through this passageway, I recognized that where I had been was West Kennet Longborough, which is a sacred site that's close to Glastonbury and Avebury Stone Circles. So it's within the sacred landscape near Avalon. And I recognized this place that was familiar to me, this cave where I've been to before, that I was exiting the underworld from that place. And I came out and just saw my clothes were tattered, and it was like I was covered in scrapes and blood and dirt. That it was like I had emerged from this battle. And the journey led me essentially back. I explain the whole vision in detail and in the book, but essentially it led me back to the White Spring, which is one of the sacred waters of Avalon. And it's also associated with the Underworld as being one of the entrances and exits to the Underworld, because it's at the foot of the Tor, which is one of the passageways where you can enter into other realms. So I cleansed myself in the waters of the White Spring and just felt myself completely renewed and glistening and sparkling and rainbow luminescent colors, and wearing white, in a completely transformed state of being.
Wow.
And then I kind of snapped out of it and came back from the vision, and there I was laying on the earth at Bride's Mound with my friend Carrie, just rubbing my back.
Wow. That's incredible.
So I did feel in that moment, that was a significant unwinding and releasing me from the underworld, coming back to this plane.
Do you relate the underworld to your cancer journey?
Absolutely. I feel that cancer is something that beckons anyone to the underworld, and whether they relate to that phrase or not, that phrase could be interchangeable with the unconscious or perhaps the shadow. But it's really about diving down into those unknown places within, because where those traumas, and there's a lot of research now that shows that cancer is typically emotional in origin. It comes from an emotional trauma. There's different belief systems about the length of time that it takes. from the trauma for the cancer to physically manifest. But it typically takes, just on the physical level, it takes about 8 years from the time of the imbalance on the mitochondrial level
Mm-hmm.
for a tumor to actually appear. So the tumor is actually a symptom of the
Mm-hmm.
imbalance. But on the emotional level, it's, I have heard as far back as 20 years
Mm-hmm.
that the original wounding occurs, and then there's the whole process throughout consciousness that it takes it, that long to kind of permeate all the levels of consciousness to ultimately manifest as that degree of physical imbalance if it goes unhealed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the call to find the wound, if it has been suppressed for that long, and it's that deeply embedded in the subconscious, and like most painful traumas are, they're very carefully protected.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a deep dive. It takes a journey of excavating excavating all that's been placed carefully in the way to protect us from remembering that or from reliving that pain, to dive into it. So in that respect, I relate to that as the underworld, because
Mm-hmm.
that's my view as a priestess. That's my view of life, and mythologically relating to our experiences. However, anyone could look at that journey as a journey into the unconscious.
Yes. Yes. That I was fascinated with the comment that you made. You just made it again now that it can take cancer 20 years to manifest. And so I did the math. And I was
Yes.
literally shocked when, and I'm not going to say my personal story, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I had a definite wound or spiritual wound, really, as
Mm-hmm.
you say, and it was exactly 20 years that I got the first inklings of cancer. I dealt with that, and then they came back again later. But that 20-year thing was just, it was very shocking to me, and I want to be with that more because that really needs to get healed for me, that
Yes.
that
Yes.
experience 20 years before. So anyway, I
Well,
really
how
appreciate that.
beautiful.
I mean, I got so many insights from your book.
Mm. That really means so much to me to hear. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Cancer Talks is an interdependent community project with a production team of 3, and we count on your contributions. We'd like to thank Vivica Taylor for her contribution. If you've learned from or been inspired by these conversations, please consider joining Vivica and becoming a donor. To support us starting at $5 a month or to make a larger tax-deductible contribution, visit patreon.com/cancertalks. Let's hear your story, and really I'd love for you to start at the beginning. Where were you born?
Absolutely. So I was actually born in Texas, which is a place that I never actually lived, only for the first 6 months of my
Mm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And however, I was born in the exact same place as one of my very best friends. So we always joke that our souls just wanted to come in the same place,
Oh.
although we didn't meet for 25 years later,
Yes,
until
right.
25 years later. So I grew up in Michigan and
Mm-hmm.
then in Colorado, Telluride, Colorado. And I have two lovely siblings that I grew up with, Sheila and Wells. I'm the eldest. And
Mm-hmm.
absolutely the defining moment of my adolescence was when I was about 13, or I was 13. And this I share about in the book. But I was in a small town in Colorado, Telluride, that was very open minded, and there were many spiritual practitioners around in the town. And actually, my childhood best friend's mother read tarot cards and did astrology, and she was someone who I really looked up to and exposed me to a lot of these like deep stirrings within me, these things that felt very familiar. And I was looking for a book in the public library to write a book report about. And this woman kind of beckoned to me to come over to her. And she asked me what I was doing. And she said, well, why don't you write your book about channeling? Because I think that you're a channel.
Hmm.
And I asked, what is that? And she said, well, if you come over to my house, I'll show you. And this is a very, very small town, very safe, no
Mm-hmm.
stoplights in the town. Everyone walks everywhere, no one locks their doors, especially in the early 1990s. So I did. And she channeled one of her spirit guides for me. And it was just one of the most heart opening, expansive, sort of life defining moments I had had up until that point, where I really understood that spirit is real and that people can connect with these forces that I had sensed were all around, that I knew on a deep level I was searching for. And that really just blasted me open. And I've understood as an adult since then that there was a lot of soul energy in me that just activated at that time sort of prematurely,
Mm-hmm.
because it just awakened lots of memories, and I started hypnotizing my friends and giving them past life regressions and channeling one of my spirit guides myself. And it was like just a lot opened. And so by the time I was in high school, I went to boarding school in Colorado Springs. And I was just very comfortable having been in this safe small town doing all these things. And
Mm-hmm.
I was calling myself a witch, which I absolutely did not understand the stigma around. I didn't really have a context for how others understood that phrase or that word.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just felt a lot of freedom in referring to myself as that. And, coming from this kind of hippie small town in the mountains to a conservative, college prep school, it was not an easy transition or a place that I was welcomed. And so the second life defining moment, which is what I worked with throughout the book, is actually being expelled from that school for being a witch, for calling
Mm-hmm.
myself a witch,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that I was ostracized, and the way that people related to me from fear
Mm-hmm.
because of those things that I shared from such a purity in my heart, from such an innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And that essentially was the emotional suppression and shutdown that occurred at that age. And
Mm-hmm.
shortly thereafter, I was put on medication. And so there was a lot of suppression that happened for about a 10-year period
Yes.
before I started to kind of stir myself awake from that. And it was quite a journey. And the sort of the apex of the journey, I would say, is going through cancer. That's what really, really forced me to look back at that time and
Mm-hmm.
reclaim that young girl. And I have amazing, loving parents. I didn't acknowledge my parents in the when I was speaking about my siblings, but yes, I have
Yes.
very loving, supportive, wonderful parents.
Yes. Yes. You talk about them in your book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, being expelled from school clearly was traumatic. Did you understand at the time that, did you still believe that what you were talking about was real and the truth, and that you didn't see a reason not to be able to talk about that? Did you see that then, or did you think that you had done something wrong?
I definitely didn't understand how I could have done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was what was so traumatic,
Mm-hmm.
because, well, there were many layers of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think because it was such a pure, innocent expression,
Mm-hmm.
and it came from a very playful, authentic place, and truly a desire to be of service and also
Mm-hmm.
to have fun. I remember there were some people who would come to me and say, like, oh, could you, what color is my aura, or, oh, could you maybe teach me how to meditate? There were occasionally those kinds of interactions that I had.
Uh-huh.
And I think people were confused because they saw that I was a nice person, but then they
Right.
didn't know how to like marry a nice person with these things that I did or talked about.
Yes.
And so there were a lot of rumors about me and things people said behind my back, and so there was just a lot. There were a lot of layers of wounding
Yes.
around the experience, but I didn't understand why it was so misunderstood, or like why there was such a blowback
Mm-hmm.
around it. And actually, when I was speaking to the headmaster of the school in what they call the discipline committee, he said directly to me, kids around campus are calling you a witch. What do you have to say about that? And I looked him right in the eye and said, I am a witch.
Good for you.
And it was in that moment but that was my first glimpse into understanding what I was actually saying,
Yes.
or getting a glimpse of the level of energy and stigma around that word, the
Yes.
level of fear and suppression and stigma and violence. It was like I got a flash of all of it
Mm-hmm.
in seeing the shudder within him when I said that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So so being expelled was actually a gift that they gave you. You got
Yes,
out as a very
ultimately.
toxic environment. Yeah, ultimately. Yes.
Ultimately, yes, and it was a very
Yes.
toxic environment. Yes.
That is just so fascinating. So then let's skip ahead a few years, I guess it is. I know that you started priestess studies before you got your cancer diagnosis. Will you tell us what a priestess is? How do you study to be a priestess?
Yes. Okay. So there's so much that could be shared around this topic,
Uh huh.
and I'll just start with my particular priestess tradition. So I'm a priestess of Avalon,
Mm-hmm.
which is a goddess tradition based in Glastonbury, England. And a priestess is a woman or a man, but traditionally a woman. But there can be male priests, and there are some male priests in my tradition. But a priestess is a woman who lives life in service to the sacred feminine, who acts as a vessel for the energies of goddess to flow into her community.
Yeah.
So that can be through ceremonies, for rites of passage or holy days. She is one who practices divination and offers spiritual support and guidance. She is attuned to the rhythms and cycles of nature, at one with the elements, and receptive to messages from Mother Earth and all her creatures and trees. She is connected to the realm that we were speaking to before around the unconscious that is
Mm-hmm.
beyond language. So interpreting life in a different current of energy. So through symbols and archetypes and metaphors and myths, really, and discerning at the greater symbolism within the context of a situation or a ritual or a person's life. I also say that a priestess is a bridge between the worlds, so helping others to open to and experience the realms of the unseen. And so a priestess of Avalon specifically works with the energies, landscape, and mysteries of the ancient Isle of Avalon, which is modern day Glastonbury in England.
Mm-hmm.
And Glastonbury, there are so many myths around Glastonbury. It's such a deeply magical place, and it's known as the heart chakra of the earth. So it emanates this powerful heart energy, this deep love, this sense of being welcomed into the arms of the Great Mother, into the arms of the Lady of Avalon, who is the goddess of the ancient isle. And there's also the shadow energy of the heart, which, because Glastonbury or Avalon also holds the energy of being, some call the Isle of the Dead, or a gateway into the underworlds.
Mm-hmm.
There's this energy of moving through the shadows of the heart in order to be in the awakened heart. So, moving through the grief and shame, despair, self pity, anger, rage, disempowerment, it kind of brings you into contact with the shadows of the heart. One, being in this magnificent heart field,
Mm-hmm.
it brings up that which needs to be seen in order to come into the true deep embodied love, joy, ecstasy. So there's a real powerful energy present in the land that really reverberates through the landscape that invites us to heal our wounds. It's known as a place of accelerated karma, where things just really come to the surface and ask to be healed.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So it's known for really catalyzing profound transformation.
fascinating. Well, let's move on. Although that what we're talking about, we I could listen to you talk about it for a long, long time. So it's hard to make. I'm going to try to switch gears here. In the piece that you read, that's in the introduction to your book, you there's one line in it, which I'll read now. That I'll read again. You've already read it, but you you got a cancer diagnosis in 2017, and you said at the time, on that day, December 1st, that it was beyond your realm of comprehension, that you were crossing a threshold into the most exquisite transformation of your life. And one of the things that you've said is that when you heard the doctor say you have cancer,
Mm-hmm.
you said it changed the trajectory of your life. So, one thing that I'm so fascinated with, you ended up choosing Western medicine
Mm-hmm.
in addition to everything that you do as a priestess. I mean, you have a whole, it's almost like a medicine bag, but you chose Western medicine, and then you completely created a new context around chemotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what you did, if you would tell that story, that is a gift to people who know that they're going to have chemotherapy, that they're in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
chemotherapy, and the
Mm-hmm.
way you honored, I'm not going to say anymore because I want to hear it from
Mm-hmm.
you, but you honored
Okay.
it.
Yes. So thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was diagnosed, I came from a background of holistic medicine only,
Mm-hmm.
acupuncture and homeopathy and herbs. And I had never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would ever put chemo into my body or radiation or anything like that. I absolutely related to it as poison.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got the diagnosis, something in me just deeply knew in my bones that I needed to do that I needed to do chemo.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I had a lot of resistance to that I needed to work through in order to accept that choice.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the most important things for me during the cancer journey that I feel is crucial for anyone moving through a health journey like that is to make your choices from deep within you,
Mm-hmm.
to really, really trust those gut feelings that you have. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to get swept away in other people's ideas or opinions, or also when you're in a state of trauma, which is absolutely the state one is in after being given
Yes.
a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, the unconscious is just wide open.
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't a filter. There isn't that filtering mechanism that we have in regular life where we can say, oh, I don't really resonate with that, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll think about that. Everything just kind of goes straight in
Mm-hmm.
when you're in that traumatized state. So it's really important to take a moment away from all of the thoughts and ideas, because so many people have opinions, And most of the people who have the opinions are people who've never had cancer
Mm-hmm.
and have never had to make those decisions. So it was so important for me to retreat and just tune in to what my body was telling me to do. And to my terror at the time, it was really telling me to do chemo.
Mm-hmm.
So I made the choice to reframe chemo as sacred medicine. And
Yes.
what I really learned about myself during the cancer journey is that I have a superpower of reframing issues as blessings and reframing things into a beautiful context and making
Yes.
things sacred. And I chose to relate to chemo as a light infusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I created a chemo support team, three of my very dear sisters, April, Val, and Carrie. And they took turns. So there were 6 rounds of chemo. So each of them took me to the appointment twice. And it was a long day. It was a full day at the hospital each time. And so one of them would come with me. We would have bags and bags of things. We would have crystals and aromatherapy diffusers and scarves and just all kinds of magical items. And we would transform the room. So we would go early, cover all of the computers or screens with scarves. We would set up an altar with crystals and any other sacred objects I wanted to bring. We would, have the smell was changed either with hydrosols or the aromatherapy, and we would do invocations and prayers and visualizations to really uplift the space.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time the nurses came in to bring me my IV, they would just be stopped in their tracks, really,
Right.
and noticing the energy in the room and noticing that how different it was and how good they felt. And
Yes.
it got to a point where the nurses would love being in the room.
Yes.
And they would, at one point, one of the nurses cried, and,
Oh.
they were asking a friend of mine to give her a reading. There was like very funny things that were happening in the context of these
Oh.
experiences. But I also had a prayer circle, which I'll just bring that in with chemo because that was such an important piece and something I
Mm-hmm.
really encourage anyone who's going through cancer, whatever treatment they choose, is to have a prayer circle and to create that support for yourself. So I had 16 incredible women on a WhatsApp group
Wow.
who would pray for me twice a day or with me. So we
Mm-hmm.
all would sit together for 5 to 10 minutes at specific times in the morning, at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And they would just visualize me completely healed. And we would all sit in that knowing that I was completely healed. And
Mm.
so, and that came from Lynn McTaggart's book, The Power of Eight, that was inspired by that book, which talks
Mm-hmm.
about the energy field that's created when 8 or more are gathered and focused on a healing intention, the
Wow.
miracles that occur.
Yes.
So my prayer circle would all be sending energy, and I had different visualizations that I did while I was receiving the IV, just the needle while everything was being prepared. And then when they would bring the medicine in, I would ask to hold the bag of chemo. So they would give me gloves, even though it obviously in plastic, I would still have to wear gloves to even touch it.
Yes.
And I would pray over it and just see that it was infused with light, just the highest level of light and love, and that it was being tuned to my body so that my body only received it from these high frequencies of love, and that it only went exactly where it was meant to go, that it had the intelligence and consciousness of sacred medicine, and that it worked in communion with the intelligence of my body,
Mm-hmm.
so that it just went exactly where I needed it to go. And for the deepest level of healing. And then I would also see it clearing karma and purging negativity and doing all of these other things to support me on all levels.
Mm-hmm.
So the ritual that was created around those days was so powerful that the days that I went to receive chemo were actually some of the most amazing days of the whole journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. At Cancer Talks, one of the things that we believe is that, or that we say, is that healing happens in community. So, when reading that story, I thought we were very much aligned, and that isolation is the meta disease. So
Absolutely.
you really demonstrated that by including your friends, your sisters in your healing journey, really every step of the way. I mean, that's
Yes.
amazing.
Thank you. I really honor them and acknowledge them. They just
Yes.
were so incredible.
And even when you were feeling horrible after the chemotherapy, you still had that context. It's, I mean, it's really, really, Anna, extraordinary. It's
Mm,
really, yeah,
thank you.
yeah, very intentional.
It was very intentional. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that I felt fantastic at all the whole
Yeah,
time.
right, right. And
but
that's what I
but
mean, in spite of not feeling
yes,
fantastic.
yes. And it was just really how I chose to relate to it.
Yes.
And I, having gone through chemo, surgery, and radiation, and reframing all of those things in a similar way
Mm-hmm.
as to what I did with chemo, after the fact, I did come to raw food and a lot of cleansing and wheatgrass. And, there's been a lot of immunotherapy and amazing treatments on the other side that have supported me and supported me in rebuilding my immune system. And so I know that there are many pathways to healing and many different pathways that work.
Mm-hmm.
However, for whatever reason, my soul chose to go through Western medicine, but
Mm-hmm.
but not to be limited by the paradigm of Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't believing, it's funny, my grandmother, who's 94 years old, said to me that first night when I was diagnosed to allow myself to be divinely led, to
Mm.
be guided to the places and people who would help me, but not to believe their lies.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
and
goodness.
and I really, I did that in lies being limiting beliefs
Mm-hmm.
around statistics or what was, what I needed to do in a certain way,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
anything
Wow.
that felt suppressive.
Did you grow up with your grandmother in Colorado?
She no, well, not in Colorado. She lives in Palm Springs,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, grew up
You
very
saw
close
her
to
when,
her.
yes, you were
Yes,
growing up. Yeah.
yes,
Well, she's a very wise woman as
yes,
well.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. There's two more things that I love to hear you talk about. I'm fascinated with Chung Fu,
Mm-hmm.
and especially their comment that there's really not a back to normal after cancer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one of the interviews that Claire did with Christine Chen recently, there's a picture of a vase or a bowl that had cracked and that was put back together. It would never look like it did before, but it
Mm-hmm.
was a new, and this is in my own words, not what she said necessarily, but a new, beautiful, strong, well, in this case, a vase or a bowl, but a being. So there is he Chung Fu talked about back to normal, that there's not
Mm-hmm.
really a back to normal. Can you tell us just a little about Chung Fu
Yes,
and that knowledge that he gave you?
of course. So, Chung Fu is a spirit guide or a being
Mm-hmm.
who is ascended in the spirit realms, who is channeled through one of my priestess teachers in Avalon named Sally Pullinger.
Mm-hmm.
So, Chung Fu, she's a trance medium. So, she completely, I've never experienced anything like the way that she works. She's incredibly, extraordinarily gifted. And Chung Fu essentially comes fully into her being and gives sessions through her. So
Mm.
her voice completely transforms. There's just the
Oh, wow.
energy completely
Yeah.
transforms.
Mm.
There's no connection anymore to Sally when Chung Fu is present.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with Chung Fu consistently on the phone throughout my journey. So every 3 weeks, it was probably every 2 or 3 weeks for at least a year. We had in-depth sessions and vision journeys, and the wisdom and insight that he brings through is just quite profound and transcends the human experience. It transcends the way that the human mind tends to organize things and interpret things, because
Mm-hmm.
he has this elevated perspective. So the insight that he brings forward is just vast,
Mm.
and I found incredibly supportive in being with me through my journey. And also, Chung Fu within Avalon has supported a lot of the priestesses, excuse me, on the priestess path there, because Sally, of course, is a very important figure in the priestess community.
Oh.
And a lot of the priestess path is around healing our feminine wounds. And a lot of feminine wounds are around suppression,
Mm-hmm.
and suppression from past lives or this life, or especially in a magical path like the priestess path, or related to the goddess or the sacred feminine. There's, in that collective cauldron, there's quite a bit of suppression.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that Chung Fu supports women in that journey to release and clear. So it was in great alignment to receive his support and the
Mm-hmm.
support of the whole Pollinger family. But
Mm.
when I was, not done, but complete with treatment, something that I noticed is that, I was at that time just riddled with PTSD, just so much
Mm.
fear, and really in a painful way trying to micromanage every little thing, every little energy that was around me, to try to keep myself as pristine as possible. So I was so scared of stress, or which obviously is incredibly stressful, but
Right.
stress, or like the wrong food, or accidentally eating sugar, or anything that
Yes.
wouldn't be in alignment with my healing,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that was just so painful. It
Mm-hmm.
was like, it was so painful. And
Mm.
I really learned a lot about PTSD as I was in the aftermath of that experience, because there's just so much shock when you go through
Yeah.
treatment, and when you go through a cancer diagnosis, that just to unwind from the shock
Mm-hmm.
is a whole other healing process.
Right.
So I just recognized that I was met sometimes with this, like, almost nonchalant, "Oh, I'm so glad you're done." "Oh, you're done now. That's so great. Like, I'm so glad you're better." And it just felt so minimizing.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, no one meant that. Obviously, it was from a pure place within the person who said it, but I
Yes.
just received it as so minimizing of the depth and magnitude
Mm-hmm.
of the journey, and not quite knowing when I would be done, or if I would ever be done. And Chung Fu just said that there's, you're never done, because you never go back to who you were, because the point is to transform.
Right.
The whole purpose of the journey is to transform into something new, into, not even something new, into more authentically who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So the person that you were before, if you're doing the work of transformation, is not going to be the person that you are on the other side. And actually, my oncologist, who definitely had moments of sharing wisdom, said to me at the beginning that most people focus on the end, like when treatment is going to be over, and they just kind of white knuckle it,
Mm-hmm.
through
Yeah.
treatment
Mm-hmm.
until they can return to their lives, like, quote unquote, return to their lives.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
then they recognize that they can't. because they're so profoundly changed and they
Mm-hmm.
don't recognize themselves, their life, or anything, so that
Yes.
but then the healing process for most people begins after treatment. And so even though I did extensive deep healing throughout treatment, there was an element of that was absolutely still true for me, in recognizing that I was still on a very deep journey of discovering who was the
Mm-hmm.
person that was being reborn through this experience. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been, it's just taken as long as it has. And I'm sure it's different for everyone. But sort of circling back to what you shared at the beginning about my taking a 1 year hiatus from social media, it was really,
Mm-hmm.
it feels like now is the time that I'm really embodied in that person that I'm meant to
Mm-hmm.
be on the other side. And
Mm.
I've needed that time to just allow that to occur.
How would you describe that person that you are
I
now?
would, I feel much more embodied and connected to, I would say, embodied and connected to the wisdom that is within me, that I've allowed all of my studies and spiritual studies and magical practices and initiations, like I've really allowed it all to incubate and to gestate and to come alive
Mm-hmm.
and be born within me in a way that is embodied on a cellular level,
Mm.
so that I'm really living from that space of communion with the divine and really in joy and peace in my heart and gratitude for the absolute miracle of life
Mm.
and the gift of being here, and the gift of love, and just in a real state of appreciation that I don't think I could have ever had before going through something so intense. And I'm sure that's something that's common for people who've, faced death or faced a life-threatening
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, that there's a level of gratitude and appreciation that comes on the other side of that
Yes.
that couldn't have been experienced without it.
Yes.
And I also am now with my beloved. I don't want to go through the podcast without acknowledging my beloved Michael.
Yes, so good. Are we
That
getting to the part about magical
the
surprises
magical
and divine
surprises.
alignment? Okay.
Absolutely. Here we are. So, in the midst of my healing journey, I traveled to Tulum and met my beloved Michael, who is British, of course, and lives
Uh-huh.
just 2 hours outside of Glastonbury. And so I am now living there with him. We're
Uh-huh.
engaged, and
Oh.
I have had the incredible blessing of becoming a second mummy to his 7-year-old daughter, Mia.
Oh,
So
that's wonderful.
part of the thank you. So part of that year was really allowing myself to sink into all of that beauty and really
Yes.
integrate and ground in that incredible blessing that was given to me.
Yes. Oh, it's a happy ending.
Yes. Yes. Thank goddess.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review in your podcast app. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. If you'd like to be in community with other cancer thrivers seeking personal transformation, please join us on Zoom every other Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific. Visit cancertalks.com/Zoom to register. If you're moved to donate, please visit patreon.com/cancertalks.